Last week while we recorded, we missed the announcement of the International 5's dates. Brian, it's busy.
It's a bad time.
It's
actually.
a real bad
Bad
weekend,
time.
at least for us.
For us, it overlaps with Gamescom, which is one of the biggest gaming conventions
Always
in the
wanted to go
world.
one. It's one of the few that I'm dying to go to. Like,
I went
just
there last
dying.
year. Loved it. Loved Germany. I don't want to go there this year.
Gamescom is such a nightmare of a show.
Oh, is it? Why?
Yeah, it's
Why
just
is that?
it is.
So let me explain to you, at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
They have Germany has no noise limits,
Ooh.
so it's just we were surrounded by the League of Legends booth, the
Wargaming booth.
and the Nvidia
Oh.
booth, and they're all just pumping
Oh, man.
electronic music. Just
Oh, we had wargaming at South by Southwest last year, and it got to the point where we had to ask the organizer to be like, they're coming through our stream and drowning out the casters. I had a mic this close to my mouth, and they were still louder than that, so I can only
Yeah,
imagine.
we were
That
on
sounds
couches 2 feet away from each other talking, and it's like, no.
Let's
this
just write on
doesn't
a
work.
notepad.
But
It's also like one of the most dense and dirty shows you'll ever go to. Like people just throw their trash on the ground.
On the
They
level
don't
of
care.
DreamHack, is it DreamHack?
Never been to DreamHack. But
Okay, yeah, dense and dirty in a good way.
it's in a bad way for Gamescom. It's just like
those are good adjectives, though.
yeah,
Right?
dense and dirty. Yeah.
Dense and dirty.
and I think at least from like the conference, like a lot of kids will take Eurostar into the city of Cologne, and they'll just like camp out on the things, like not shower and stuff like that. So it's just
Cool.
It's just one of those things. It's a public show, and how many people? Like 300,000.
300,000 people over the
Oh my
weekend.
goodness!
It's terrifying trying to get through those halls.
I
Yeah.
can only imagine.
I mean, last year at the end of last year, we saw a little bit of drama from players talking about there being too many tournaments, it being too busy, too exhausting. What do you make of this? Right, like this is a tournament that starts on a Monday, it ends on a Saturday, August 3rd through 9th. That's a long time for group stages, qualifiers, finals.
Nobody cares. They could have the international for 6 months a year. The amount of money that's
Good point.
involved, like the players aren't going to care about that. But to address the point, which is how the saturation point has been reached.
And one quick question: didn't EG actually kind of bow out of a tournament recently just because they were
Oh
exhausted?
yeah, no, it's not just EG. Plenty. I mean,
Yeah,
hell,
yeah, well,
D2L, like our D2L season this year was rocky, to put it very mildly. And a big part of that is we went to like Secret originally signed on, and they said no. I'm not going to get into the reasons why.
Yeah, of
It's not some backroom stuff. It's very bottom line kind of stuff. But anyway, they weren't impressed with the prize pool growth because basically there was none. Which is to another point we might bring up
we'll
later.
talk about that later.
The value of cosmetics and how that kind of is warping the view of what esports in Dota 2 is, and not to make a judgment call whether it's good or bad. I don't think that the perception is really in line with the reality based on what we see behind the scenes and what we have gathered and the way we're affected by it. But anyway, yeah, I mean, EG, Cloud9 bowed out of ours. We didn't have Vici or Newbie, same reasons. Navi ended up dropping out due to other commitments. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely hit the point where things are super concentrated. And if there's a worry that I have, it's that so many organizations that are running tournaments right now are basically in a situation where either they succeed wildly and make a little money and enough to not only they make enough to have another tournament and to maybe make a little profit, or they fail and they've been blown a huge investment. And thankfully, that's not an issue that we have with the D2L. I'm a smaller part. The D2L is a smaller part of a much bigger machine. But with the saturation point being what it is, more money coming in, and the money coming in, it seems to me, is not always coming in with the right expectation of what their ROI is going to be. And that is anything from sponsors and, that's a whole other discussion. I could speak for an hour on this because it's the kind of thing that we discuss every day in the office, trying to figure out how best to not only succeed where we want to, but to give people what they want and to give them the things that are not only going to sell, but are going to please. But it's a very tumultuous time right now, and Dota 2 seems very stable in a lot of ways it is, but the statistics I've seen, and granted I haven't vetted them completely, so I could be way off base, but the growth in Dota 2 right now is taking place in a number of regions. China, for the most part, South America is growing like wildfire. But these are not regions that are going to be that are huge demographic targets for especially Western-based sponsorship. It's not too many people in the West are really seeing Brazil as a huge place to throw their sponsorship money, and this creates an issue. It creates an issue where when we see these demographics shift and we see how much money actually is coming from China, especially in terms of cosmetics, how complicated is this system going to get? I have no idea what the back end and the tax and laws and everything else are regarding Valve, but I worry. There's the amount of money that's coming in and out now is getting significant enough that people are going to start to eyeball it that have less than good intentions. They're going to have, you're going to start coming under tax scrutiny. And I've been saying this about companies like Kickstarter, for example. Like Kickstarter, I feel like is due for a hard crash soon because the amount of money that they throughput, there has to be more regulation to it. So I feel like it's a cloudy horizon, not necessarily a bad one. The storm's not here yet, but people should be ready. And companies like ours and everyone else are really beginning, not necessarily to scramble, but to look really hard at how we're going to be able to navigate this.
Now that you mentioned, I almost wonder if the sponsorship thing precludes new teams from coming out of nowhere to join these tournaments, right? Like looking at TI5, are we going to see a lot of the same teams we see now?
A lot of the same players.
Certainly, right? Like somebody, I mean, we saw some transitions recently out of EG and into EG especially. With those departures and new acquisitions.
There's been roster changes all around.
Yeah, like it's been a weird, 8 months. We've seen lots of transitions. So those teams will obviously be there. We saw Secret come out of the ashes of other changes and stuff like that, which is great. But
Alliance is not even close to what it once was, as far as
player base,
yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder, like with all of that stuff you just articulated very well in mind, does that mean we won't see Brazilian teams? We won't see an Australian team or whatever, right? Like, does that preclude them from joining the international?
Well, here's the issue with the international and just the way that things work right now. Basically, if you want to succeed and have a chance to penetrate the Western scene, which is, I mean, you have the West and China. I mean, those are the two regions. We can even use a modern example of Sumail. New mid for EG.
15 years old.
Oh, man.
Insane.
I on the way back from D2L, like, I was literally put in charge and making sure he got to his airplane.
Wow.
I mean, this is, we all wear different hats, and I was wearing it. But, I mean, he's an amazing kid, by the way. Like, I had a few words with him, and he was really cool and collected at Vegas, much more so than I certainly would have been at 15. But like, just to use that as an example for the greater point, so far as talent coming out of South America and these other regions, the problem is they can't compete in major tournaments to really sharpen against other teams. Like, you're not going to see South American teams in the D2L because of server issues. Like, and it's kind of a chicken and an egg issue. Like, what's the problem? Is the talent not good enough to justify them being involved, or are we not involving them, or is the reason their talent level isn't quite where it should be is because they're not being invited? Because server issues are a big thing whenever every tournament now has an online group stage outside of the international, obviously. Sumail has been a prodigy for a while now, but he lived in Pakistan. He just relocated to Chicago in the last 6 months, and now suddenly he's on Evil Geniuses. So it wasn't his talent, it wasn't his ability, it wasn't his practice schedule or anything else that marginalized him. It's he was in a situation where even if he had the best players from that region, they were never going to be invited to any major tournament because of, again, server issues. And it is an old boys club to a certain extent in terms of Dota players. They know each other, and either you get to know them or you're left on the outside looking in, hoping that maybe you can find 4 more just like you that are on that level and you can make a splash with a big win in a tournament. Then suddenly you're on the radar of your own volition. But that doesn't happen very often at all. Usually it's just, this team has a player that's out for whatever reason, or they kick this person out, and they happen to know this awesome 18-year-old kid who's no one's ever heard of because they pub with him once in a while. Like, that tends to be the pattern that I see. But so far as like South American talent, the teams will be there because of the qualifier system, or at least they'll have a chance to be. But what needs to happen for players in those regions, and it's asking a lot, and most organizations and teams aren't just going to blindly invest into it, but like you've got players like Smash in South America, DDZ out of Southeast Asia that are just phenomenal players by every metric, even just the eyeball test. You look like, this kid's good. But until they move to Europe or until they move to North America, they're never really going to have a chance to penetrate the scene. They just can't. It's the same thing like if you go all the way back to TI2, when Loda was kind of bouncing around teams before he landed with Alliance, he had to move to Singapore so he could play with Zenith at that time. There was no option for him to just be like, we'll play remotely. That's not an option at all. And it's a big hurdle to talent that's coming out of these regions where, ironically, most of the growth in Dota 2 seems to be coming. South America, Southeast Asia, and so on.
Is there a solution to that? Like, does Valve just add more servers? Do they make their servers more stable? Like, what is the easy answer there?
I don't think you can get over geography and the limits of electricity and light. I mean, connectivity is connectivity. I mean, you're never going to get 10 ping from from Pakistan to U.S. East. It's never going to happen, at least in our lifetime. I wouldn't. Well, that's probably being a little bold because I had another conversation the other day. Like I said, I turned 30.
I get bad ping when I'm on U.S. East from San Francisco.
Dude,
like, it's brutal.
Dude, we couldn't even get good ping at Caesars. Which,
Yeah.
Again, is another issue that doesn't need to be discussed right now. But yeah, like esports is growing tremendously, but it's growing in a very top-heavy way. And the only solution that I seem to see is either you get the equivalent of angel investors, or you just start to get these people that are willing to get together out of their own pocket. When I say people, I mean individuals, not companies, and just say, we want to get into this space, and I've got 10 grand saved up in the bank. I've got 3 other guys that have it. We're going to rent you a team house for 6 months and move you to the East Coast. Do something, please. Like, that's right now. I mean, that or Kickstarter, crowdfunding, that kind of a thing. But let's be honest, crowdfunding for the most part is very reliant on star power, very reliant on who throws your hat with
Right,
them.
like if a team comes out and says, like, we have a Patreon and you can sponsor these players to play. And it's like, who?
Who are you guys?
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you think there's been some roster changes recently, even up to over the past week or so, right?
Oh, yeah. I don't think they're going to stop anytime soon.
I was going to ask, when do you think those need to stop to give these teams time to work together to be ready for TI4? Because that's or TI5. Because that's in 8 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
TI5, TI's TI, and this is, again, you could fold this into a whole other discussion about something that isn't very well known, but there's a lot of sponsors are actually really nervous about Dota 2 right now. They're not as willing to come in now as they were a year ago, and it's because they're beginning to recognize that these players treat TI5 as the be-all, end-all. They're not relying on sponsorship money. They're not relying on team contracts anymore. Basically, if you're a top 100 player in the world, all you care about is finding the right group of people to be with come TI. Like, that's all you care about, because your payday is so much more likely to come out of that. Even finishing in the bottom half, of the field, that's just a much more likely prospect than going through the day-to-day. Not just more likely, but honestly more pleasant. It's a lot more open. You don't have as much obligation. You don't have to sign or worry about these contracts as much, because you just don't care. Just find 4 guys that can place you 8th at TI. Find 4 guys that maybe, if you have a run like Team Liquid did at TI3, maybe you make it a little further than anticipated, and suddenly you got a payday, a major payday.
Create like a really unhealthy attitude within the player base, like the professional players toward teams.
You can see it.
Like, there's no loyalty for a player on Navi.
Read Twitter. Just think about since TI4, how much the conversation about player union has intensified since then.
Yes.
How much people, like players speaking out, LOL, I don't care about these tournaments anymore. That has a lot to do because they're not like most tournaments now. They're so focused, and I'm not condemning them for it. I totally understand it, but they're so focused on looking ahead to the next international, how big it's going to be, making sure they have and it's why you're beginning to see, like right now, I think most teams want to calm down by no later than say February or March and try to consistently practice leading up to TI. It's why you're starting to see a bit more volatility. Like, you look at Cloud9, it's come out that it wasn't just that AUI and Pi left, they were kicked. And, there were other issues with other teams that I'm not going to discuss because I'm not their promotional person. It's not my place.
Sure.
But I know some things behind the scenes, and there's a lot of volatility and a lot of even though they may come across as amicable separations, they're not actually in reality. So it is volatile, and the attitude of players is bleeding in a lot of ways to the player base too.
I have kind of a loaded question to follow up on that. And I mean, you know things that you can't talk about or it's uncomfortable or whatever, but do you think that this has to do with players being so youthful?
I think that's a cop-out, honestly.
Okay. I've just been curious.
No.
I'm not to be accusatory of them, right?
Oh, no, absolutely.
Because I'm still way too immature and dumb to make any of the decisions they're making. I'm not sure if that
that's the
factors in.
thing. Everyone in this room, we work full-time in this industry, and most of us got into it relatively young. I actually came in a little bit later. I didn't get into it until I was 24, 25. But most of us, we know how to put our shoes on in the morning. We brush our teeth, we get on the BART, and we get to work. These kids, even though maybe their attitudes on Twitter and maybe the way they flame each other kind of pigeonholes them into a bit more of they're just immature kids. No, they're not. I spend a lot of time around these guys. Most of them are very insightful, very focused. And yes, there is truth, as a 20-year-old is not going to know as much as a 30-year-old, just based on nothing but flat-out experience, okay? But that doesn't mean these guys are out there making wrong decisions the way that I did whenever I snuck out and took my car at 16 years old, okay? It's not that. And I do think there is a little bit more impetuousness to it, especially when it comes to things people say. But players are players are empowering themselves and each other to not be as scared as they once were, and that's a good and a bad thing. I mean, when I say scared, you don't want them scared, but again, sponsors care about these things. Sponsors, when they sign on with a company or a team, very often it's because they want not just the team, they don't just want their logo, but they want their brand associated with one personality or maybe two on that team that they feel like the community perceives in a way they want their product perceived. And it goes beyond just, a logo on a t-shirt, which is the way I honestly feel like a lot of people on the outside looking in assume esports works is, you just sell logos on t-shirts. No, actually, the way that most esports organizations that are worth the damn work is that's a value added. You don't even include that in the business plan whenever you're approaching a major sponsor. It's just like, and we'll do that for you, because that's just how that works.
I think a fascinating thing is I was in a Best Buy this week, and I was looking at the keyboard and stuff, and there were players from different esports on there.
Jeff's on there.
Yeah, he is. But there were a couple players that I think was a league player, Chowster, who isn't in the organization anymore, and it's still tied there, and so it's not having that stability is scary. Where it's just okay. Someone's like, oh, well, I like this person. I'm gonna look up. And they're like, oh, they're not on EG anymore.
Navi still promotes all of their stuff with Puppy.
Yeah. Yep.
It's so weird.
Yep. And again, it depends on what level you're looking at. Esports, from a broadcasting point of view, is actually following trend with what's going on in major sports right now. I don't know if you guys keep up with the NFL, the NBA, MLB, or whatever, but most of the major broadcasting rights were actually up over the last few years, and you saw this feeding frenzy and just an absolute explosion in the amount of money. And it's because with the plethora of options we have so far as videos on demand, Netflix, and everything else, the one broadcast commodity that still commands a gigantic audience and unbelievably high, 30-year ago high advertising dollars is live broadcasting, and that's where esports has a leg up, because we're all live broadcasting, or it's on YouTube to begin with. So from that, again, it's top heavy from that point of view, from Twitch's point of view, to a certain extent from major players, like us, like Good Game. We're growing in a huge way. But there is a whole lot of sand and clay beneath the cement foundation, and we're all very conscious of that. And so much of it, again, is game to game too. And I don't know enough about games like League of Legends to begin to compare and contrast the two. I could talk a little bit about it, but it's two different approaches. Both have their ups and their downs. And what's going on with Dota right now does worry me. I don't think the game's going to die. I don't think it's going anywhere. It's still my favorite game in the world. But there are cracks in the facade that are beginning to show.